Chapter 23 of Hans Christian Andersen, Fairytales and Short Stories, Volume 5, 1860 to 1865. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Little T. Hans Christian Andersen, Fairytales and Short Stories, Volume 5, 1860 to 1865, by Hans Christian Andersen, translated by H.B. PAULL, 1812 to 1888. The Windmill. A windmill stood upon the hill, proud to look at, and it was proud too. "I am not proud at all," it said, "but I am very much enlightened without and within. I have sun and moon for my outward use, and for inward use too. And into the bargain I have sterowin candles, train oil, and lamps, and tallow candles. I may well say that I'm enlightened. I'm a thinking being, and so well constructed that it's quite delightful. I have a good windpipe in my chest, and I have 4 wings that are placed outside my head, just beneath my hat. The birds have only 2 wings, and are obliged to carry them on their backs. I am a Dutchman by birth. That may be seen by my figure, a fine Dutchman. They are considered supernatural beings, I know, and yet I am quite natural. I have a gallery round my chest, and house-room beneath it. That's where my thoughts dwell. My strongest thought, who rules and reigns, is called by others the man in the mill. He knows what he wants, and is lord over the mill and the bran, but he has his companion too, and she calls herself mother. She is the very heart of me. She does not run about stupidly and awkwardly, for she knows what she wants. She knows what she can do. She's as soft as zephyr, and as strong as a storm. She knows how to begin a thing carefully, and to have her own way. She is my soft temper, and the father is my hard one. They are 2, and yet 1. They each call the other my half. These 2 have some little boys, young thoughts, that can grow. The little ones keep everything in order, when lately, in my wisdom, I let the father and the boys examine my throat and the hole in my chest, to see what was going on there, for something in me was out of order, and it's well to examine oneself. The little ones made a tremendous noise. The youngest jumped up until my hat, and shouted so there that it tickled me. The little thoughts may grow, I know that very well, and out in the world thoughts come too, and not only of my kind, for as far as I can see, I cannot discern anything like myself. But the wingless houses, whose throats make no noise, have thoughts too, and these come to my thoughts, and make love to them, as it is called. It's wonderful enough, yes. There are many wonderful things. Something has come over me, or into me. Something has changed in the millwork. It seems as if the one half, the father, had altered and had received a better temper and a more affectionate helpmate, so young and good, and yet the same, only more gentle and good through the course of time. What was bitter has passed away, and the whole is much more comfortable. The days go on, and the days come nearer and nearer to clearness and to joy, and then a day will come when it will be over with me, but not over altogether. I must be pulled down that I may be built up again. I shall cease, but yet shall live on, to become quite a different being, and yet remain the same. That's difficult for me to understand. However enlightened I may be with sun, moon, sterowin, train oil, and tallow, my old woodwork and my old brickwork will rise again from the dust. I will hope that I may keep my old thoughts, the father and the mill, and the mother, great ones and little ones, the family, for I call them all great and little, the company of thoughts, because I must and cannot refrain from it. And I must also remain myself, with my throat in my chest, my wings on my head, the gallery round my body. Else I should not know myself, nor could the others know me, and say, there's the mill on the hill, proud to look at, and yet not proud at all. That is what the mill said. Indeed, it said much more, but that is the most important part. And the days came, and the days went, and yesterday was the last day. Then the mill caught fire. The flames rose up high, and beat out and in, and bit at the beams and planks, and ate them up. The mill fell, and nothing remained of it but a heap of ashes. The smoke drove across the scene of the conflagration, and the wind carried it away. Whatever had been alive in the mill remained, and what had been gained by it has nothing to do with the story. The miller's family, one soul, many thoughts, and yet only one, built a splendid mill, which answered its purpose. It was quite like the old one, and people said, "Why, yonder is the mill on the hill, proud to look at." But this mill was better arranged, more according to the time than the last, so that progress might be made. The old beams had become worm-eaten and spongy. They lay in dust and ashes. The body of the mill did not rise out of the dust as they had believed it would do. They had taken it literally, and all things are not to be taken literally. End of the Windmill. Recording by Little T.
Section 24 of Hans Christian Andersen Fairytales and Short Stories, Volume 5, 1860 to 1865. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by C.J. Plogue. Hans Christian Andersen Fairytales and Short Stories, Volume 5, 1860 to 1865, by Hans Christian Andersen, translated by H.P. PAULL. In the Nursery. Father and mother and brothers and sisters were gone to the play. Only little Anna and her grandpapa were left at home. "We'll have a play, too," he said, "and it may begin immediately." "But we have no theatre," cried little Anna, "and we have no one to act for us. My old doll cannot, for she is a fright, and my new one cannot, for she must not rumple her new clothes." "One can always get actors if one makes use of what one has," observed Grandpapa. "Now we'll go into the theatre. Here we will put up a book, there another, and there a third, in a sloping row. Now 3 on the other side, so now we have the side scenes. The old box that lies yonder may be the back stairs, and we'll lay the flooring on top of it. The stage represents a room, as everyone may see. Now we want the actors. Let us see what we can find in the plaything box. First the personages, and then we will get the play ready, one after the other. That will be capital. Here's a pipe head, and yonder an odd glove. They will do very well for father and daughter." "But those are only 2 characters," said little Anna. "Here's my brother's old waistcoat. That play in our piece, too?" "It's big enough, certainly," replied Grandpapa. "It shall be the lover. There's nothing in the pockets, and that's very interesting, for that's half of an unfortunate attachment. And here we have the nutcracker's boots with spurs to them. Row, dow, dow, how they can stamp and strut! They shall represent the unwelcome wooer, whom the lady does not like. What kind of a play will you have now? Shall it be a tragedy or a domestic drama?" "A domestic drama, please," said little Anna, "for the others are so fond of that. Do you know one?" "I know 100," said Grandpapa. "Those that are most in favor are from the French, but they are not good for little girls. In the meantime we may take one of the prettiest, for inside they're all very much alike." Now I shake the pen. Cockalorum. So now here's the play. Bryn, Bran, Span, New. Now listen to the playbill. And Grandpapa took a newspaper and read as if he were reading from it. The Pipehead and the Goodhead, a family drama in one act. Characters: Mr. Pipehead, a father; Miss Glove, a daughter; Mr. Waistcoat, a lover; Mr. De Boots, a suitor. And now we're going to begin. The curtain rises. We have no curtain, so it's risen already. All the characters are there, and so we have them at hand. Now I speak as Papa Pipehead. He's angry today. One can see that he's a colored meerschaum. Snick, snack, schnurp, basilur. I'm the master of this house. I'm the father of my daughter. Will you hear what I have to say? Mr. De Boots is a person in whom one may see one's face. His upper part is of Morocco, and he has spurs into the bargain. Snick, snack, snack. He shall have my daughter. Now listen to what the waistcoat says, little Anna, said Grandpapa. Now the waistcoat's speaking. The waistcoat has a lay-down collar and is very modest, but he knows his own value and has quite a right to say what he says. I haven't a spot on me. Goodness of material ought to be appreciated. I'm of real silk and have strings to me. Ding day, but no longer. You don't keep your color in the wash. This is Mr. Pipehead who is speaking. Mr. De Boots is watertight, of strong leather, and yet very delicate. He can creak and clank with his spurs, and has an Italian physiognomy. But they ought to speak in verses, said Anna, for I've heard that's the most charming way of all. They can do that, too, replied Grandpapa, and if the public demands it, they will talk in that way. Just look at little Miss Glove, how she's pointing her fingers. Could I but have my love, who then so happy as a glove? Ah, if I from him must part, I'm sure 'twill break my heart. Bah! The last word was spoken by Mr. Pipehead, and now it's Mr. Waistcoat's turn. Oh, Glove, my own dear, though it cost thee a tear, thou must be mine, for whole Gdansk has sworn it. Mr. De Boots, hearing this, kicks up, jingles his spurs, and knocks down 3 of the side scenes. That's exceedingly charming, cried little Anna. Silence, silence, said Grandpapa. Silent approbation will show that you are the educated public in the stalls. Now Miss Glove sings her great song with a startling effect. I can't see, hi-ho, and therefore I'll crow, kikeriki in the lofty hall. Now comes the exciting part, little Anna. This is the most important in all the play. Mr. Waistcoat undoes himself and addresses his speech to you that you may applaud. But leave it alone. That's considered more genteel. I am driven to the extremities. Take care of yourself. Now comes the plot. You are the Pipehead, and I am the Goodhead. Snap! There you go. Do you notice this, little Anna? Said Grandpapa. That's a most charming comedy. Mr. Waistcoat seized the old Pipehead and put him in his pocket, and there he lies, and the waistcoat says, You are in my pocket. You can't come out till you promise to unite me to your daughter, Glove on the left. I hold out my right hand. That's awfully pretty, said little Anna. And now the old Pipehead replies, Though I'm all ear, very stupid I appear, where's my humour? Gone, I fear, and I feel my hollow stick's not here. Ah, never, my dear, did I feel so queer. Oh, pray let me out, and like a lamb led to slaughter, I'll betroth you, no doubt, to my daughter. Is the play over already? Said little Anna. By no means, replied Grandpapa. It's only all over with Mr. De Boots. Now the lovers kneel down, and one of them sings, Father, and the other, Come do as you ought to do, bless your son and daughter. And they receive his blessing and celebrate their wedding, and all the pieces of furniture sing in chorus, Clink, clanks, 1,000 thanks. And now the play is over. And now we'll applaud, said Grandpapa. We'll call them all out, and the pieces of furniture too, for they are of mahogany. And is not our play just as good as those which the others have in the real theatre? Our play is much better, said Grandpapa. It is shorter, the performers are natural, and it has passed away the interval before tea time. End of In the Nursery. Recording by C.J. Plogue.
Chapter 25 of Hans Christian Andersen, Fairytales and Short Stories, Volume 5, 1860 to 1865. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Hans Christian Andersen, Fairytales and Short Stories, Volume 5, 1860 to 1865, by Hans Christian Andersen. Translated by H.P. PAULL, 1812 to 1888. The Golden Treasure. The drummer's wife went into the church. She saw the new altar with the painted pictures and the carved angels. Those upon the canvas and in the glory over the altar were just as beautiful as the carved ones, and they were painted and gilt into the bargain. Their hair gleamed golden in the sunshine, lovely to behold. But the real sunshine was more beautiful still. It shone redder, clearer through the dark trees when the sun went down. It was lovely thus to look at the sunshine of heaven. And she looked at the red sun, and she thought about it so deeply, and thought of the little one whom the stork was to bring. And the wife of the drummer was very cheerful, and looked and wished that the child might have a gleam of sunshine given to it, so that it might at least become like one of the shining angels over the altar. And when she really had the little child in her arms, and held it up to its father, then it was like one of the angels in the church to behold, with hair like gold. The gleam of the setting sun was upon it. "My golden treasure, my riches, my sunshine," said the mother, and she kissed the shining locks, and it sounded like music and song in the room of the drummer. And there was joy and life and movement. The drummer beat a roll of joy, and the drum said, the fire drum that was beaten when there was a fire in the town, "Red hair, the little fellow has red hair. Believe the drum, and not what your mother says. Rub-a-dub, rub-a-dub." And the town repeated what the fire drum had said. The boy was taken to church. The boy was christened. There was nothing much to be said about his name. He was called Peter. The whole town, and the drum too, called him Peter, the drummer's boy with the red hair. But his mother kissed his red hair, and called him her golden treasure. In the hollow way in the clayey bank, many had scratched their names as a remembrance. "Celebrity is always something," said the drummer, and so he scratched his own name there, and his little son's name likewise. And the swallows came. They had, on their long journey, seen more durable characters engraven on rocks and on the walls of the temples in Hindustan, mighty deeds of great kings, immortal names so old that no one now could read or speak them. Remarkable celebrity. In the clayey bank the martins built their nest. They bored holes in the deep declivity, and the splashing rain and the thin mist came and crumbled and washed the names away. And the drummer's name also, and that of his little son. "Peter's name will last a full year and a half longer," said the father. Fool, thought the fire drum, but it only said, "Dub, dub, dub, rub-a-dub." He was a boy full of life and gladness, this drummer's son with the red hair. He had a lovely voice. He could sing, and he sang like a bird in the woodland. There was melody, and yet no melody. "He must become a chorister boy," said his mother. "He shall sing in the church and stand among the beautiful gilded angels who are like him." "Fiery cat," said some of the witty ones of the town. The drum heard that from the neighbors' wives. "Don't go home, Peter," cried the street boys. "If you sleep in the garret, there'll be a fire in the house, and the fire drum will have to be beaten." "Look out for the drumsticks," replied Peter, and, small as he was, he ran up boldly, and gave the foremost such a punch in the body with his fist that the fellow lost his legs and tumbled over, and the others took their legs off with themselves very rapidly. The town musician was very genteel and fine. He was the son of the royal plate washer. He was very fond of Peter and would sometimes take him to his home, and he gave him a violin and taught him to play it. It seemed as if the whole art lay in the boy's fingers, and he wanted to be more than a drummer. He wanted to become musician to the town. "I'll be a soldier," said Peter, for he was still quite a little lad, and it seemed to him the finest thing in the world to carry a gun, and to be able to march 1, 2, 1, 2, and to wear a uniform and a sword. "Ah, you learn to long for the drumskin, drum, drum, dum," said the drum. "Yes, if he could only march his way up to be a general," observed his father. "But before he can do that, there must be a war." "Heaven forbid," said his mother. "We have nothing to lose," remarked the father. "Yes, we have my boy," she retorted. "But suppose he came back a general," said the father. "Without arms and legs?" cried the mother. "No, I would rather keep my golden treasure with me." Drum, dum, dum. The fire drum and all the other drums were beating, for war had come. The soldiers all set out, and the son of the drummer followed them. "Redhead, golden treasure," the mother wept. The father in fancy saw him famous. The town musician was of opinion that he ought not to go to war, but should stay at home and learn music. "Redhead," said the soldiers, and little Peter laughed. But when one of them sometimes said to another, "Foxy," he would bite his teeth together and look another way into the wide world. He did not care for the nickname. The boy was active, pleasant of speech, and good-humored. "That is the best canteen," said his old comrades. And many a night he had to sleep under the open sky, wet through with the driving rain or the falling mist. But his good humor never forsook him. The drumsticks sounded. Rub-a-dub, all up, all up. Yes, he was certainly born to be a drummer. The day of battle dawned. The sun had not yet risen, but the morning was come. The air was cold. The battle was hot. There was mist in the air, but still more gunpowder smoke. The bullets and shells flew over the soldiers' heads and into their heads, into their bodies and limbs, but still they pressed forward. Here or there, one or other of them would sink on his knees, with bleeding temples and a face as white as chalk. The little drummer still kept his healthy color. He had suffered no damage. He looked cheerfully at the dog of the regiment, which was jumping along as merrily as if the whole thing had been got up for his amusement, and as if the bullets were only flying about that he might have a game of play with them. "March! Forward! March!" This was the word of command for the drum. The word had not yet been given to fall back, though they might have done so, and perhaps there would have been much sense in it. And now, at last, the word "retire" was given. But our little drummer beat "forward! March!" for he had understood the command thus, and the soldiers obeyed the sound of the drum. That was a good roll, and proved the summons to victory for the men, who had already begun to give way. Life and limb were lost in the battle. Bombshells tore away the flesh in red strips. Bombshells lit up into a terrible glow the straw heaps to which the wounded had dragged themselves to lie untended for many hours, perhaps for all the hours they had left to live. It's no use thinking of it, and yet one cannot help thinking of it, even far away in the peaceful town. The drummer and his wife also thought of it, for Peter was at war. "Now I'm tired of these complaints," said the fire drum. Again the day of battle dawned. The sun had not yet risen, but it was morning. The drummer and his wife were asleep. They had been talking about their son, as, indeed, they did almost every night, for he was out yonder in God's hand. And the father dreamt that the war was over, and the soldiers had returned home, and that Peter wore a silver cross on his breast. But the mother dreamt that she had gone into the church, and had seen the painted pictures and the carved angels with the gilded hair, and her own dear boy, the golden treasure of her heart, who was standing among the angels in white robes, singing so sweetly, as surely only the angels can sing, and that he had soared up with them into the sunshine, and nodded so kindly at his mother. "My golden treasure," she cried out, and she awoke. "Now the good God has taken him to himself." She folded her hands, and hid her face in the cotton curtains of the bed, and wept. "Where does he rest now, among the many in the big grave that they have dug for the dead? Perhaps he's in the water in the marsh. Nobody knows his grave, no holy words have been read over it." And the Lord's Prayer went inaudibly over her lips. She bowed her head, and was so weary that she went to sleep. And the days went by, in life as in dreams. It was evening. Over the battlefield a rainbow spread, which touched the forest and the deep marsh. It has been said, and is preserved in popular belief, that where the rainbow touches the earth, a treasure lies buried, a golden treasure. And here there was one. No one but his mother thought of the little drummer, and therefore she dreamt of him. And the days went by, in life as in dreams. Not a hair of his head had been hurt, not a golden hair. "Drum-a-rum, drum-a-rum, there he is," the drum might have said, and his mother might have sung, if she had seen or dreamt it. With hurrah and song, adorned with green wreaths of victory, they came home, as the war was at an end, and peace had been signed. The dog of the regiment sprang on in front with large bounds, and made the way 3 times as long for himself as it really was. And days and weeks went by, and Peter came into his parents' room. He was as brown as a wild man, and his eyes were bright, and his face beamed like sunshine, and his mother held him in her arms. She kissed his lips, his forehead, and his red hair. She had her boy back again. He had not a silver cross on his breast, as his father had dreamt, but he had sound limbs, a thing the mother had not dreamt. And what a rejoicing was there! They laughed, and they wept, and Peter embraced the old fire drum. "There stands the old skeleton still," he said, and the father beat a roll upon it. "One would think that a great fire had broken out here," said the fire drum. "Bright day, fire in the heart, golden treasure, scratch, scrat, scrat." And what then? What then? Ask the town musician. "Peter's far outgrowing the drum," he said. "Peter will be greater than I." And yet he was the son of a royal plate washer, and all that he had learned in half a lifetime, Peter learned in half a year. There was something so merry about him, something so truly kind-hearted. His eyes gleamed, and his hair gleamed too. There was no denying that. "He ought to have his hair dyed," said the neighbor's wife. That answered capitally with the policeman's daughter, and she got a husband. But her hair turned as green as duckweed and was always having to be colored up. "She knows how to manage for herself," said the neighbors, "and so can Peter. He comes to the most genteel houses, even to the burgomaster's, where he gives Miss Charlotte pianoforte lessons. He could play. He could play fresh out of his heart the most charming pieces that had never been put upon music paper. He played in the bright nights, and in the dark nights, too. The neighbors declared it was unbearable, and the fire drum was of the same opinion. He played until his thoughts soared up and burst forth in great plans for the future, to be famous. And Burgomaster Charlotte sat at the piano. Her delicate fingers danced over the keys and made them ring into Peter's heart. It seemed too much for him to bear, and this happened not once but many times. And at last, one day, he seized the delicate fingers and the white hand and kissed it, and looked into her great brown eyes. Heaven knows what he said, but we may be allowed to guess at it. Charlotte blushed to guess at it. She reddened from brow to neck, and answered not a single word. And then strangers came into the room, and one of them was the state councillor's son. He had a lofty white forehead, and carried it so high that it seemed to go back into his neck. And Peter sat by her for a long time, and she looked at him with gentle eyes. At home that evening he spoke of travel in the wide world, and of the golden treasure that lay hidden for him in his violin. To be famous. "Tum-a-lum, tum-a-lum, tum-a-lum," said the fire drum. "Peter has gone clear out of his wits. I think there must be a fire in the house." Next day the mother went to market. "Shall I tell you news, Peter?" she asked when she came home. "A capital piece of news. Burgomaster Charlotte has engaged herself to the state councillor's son. The betrothal took place yesterday evening." "No," cried Peter, and he sprang up from his chair. But his mother persisted in saying yes. She had heard it from the baker's wife, whose husband had it from the burgomaster's own mouth. And Peter became as pale as death and sat down again. "Good heaven, what's the matter with you?" asked his mother. "Nothing, nothing, only leave me to myself," he answered. But the tears were running down his cheeks. "My sweet child, my golden treasure," cried the mother, and she wept. But the fire drum sang, not out loud, but inwardly. "Charlotte's gone, Charlotte's gone, and now the song is done." But the song was not done. There were many more verses in it, long verses, the most beautiful verses, the golden treasures of a life. "She behaves like a mad woman," said the neighbor's wife. "All the world is to see the letters she gets from her golden treasure, and to read the words that are written in the papers about his violin playing. And he sends her money, too, and that's very useful to her since she has been a widow." "He plays before emperors and kings," said the town musician. "I never had that fortune. But he's my pupil, and he does not forget his old master." And his mother said, "His father dreamt that Peter came home from the war with a silver cross. He did not gain one in the war, but it is still more difficult to gain one in this way. Now he has the cross of honor. If his father had only lived to see it." "He's grown famous," said the fire drum. And all his native town said the same thing, for the drummer's son, Peter, with the red hair, Peter whom they had known as a little boy running about in wooden shoes, and then as a drummer playing for dancers, was become famous. "He played at our house before he played in the presence of kings," said the burgomaster's wife. "At that time he was quite smitten with Charlotte. He was always of an aspiring turn. At that time he was saucy and an enthusiast. My husband laughed when he heard of the foolish affair, and now our Charlotte is a state councillor's wife." A golden treasure had been hidden in the heart and soul of the poor child, who had beaten the roll as a drummer, a roll of victory for those who had been ready to retreat. There was a golden treasure in his bosom, the power of sound. It burst forth on his violin, as if the instrument had been a complete organ, and as if all of the elves of a midsummer night were dancing across the strings. In its sounds were heard the piping of the thrush, and the full, clear note of the human voice. Therefore the sound brought rapture to every heart, and carried his name triumphant through the land. That was a great firebrand, the firebrand of inspiration. "And he looks so splendid," said the young ladies, and the old ladies too. And the oldest of all procured an album for famous locks of hair, wholly and solely that she might beg a lock of his rich, splendid hair, that treasure, that golden treasure. And the sun came into the poor room of the drummer, elegant as a prince, happier than a king. His eyes were as clear and his face was as radiant as sunshine, and he held his mother in his arms, and she kissed his mouth and wept as blissfully as anyone can weep for joy. And he nodded at every old piece of furniture in the room, at the cupboard with the teacups, at the flower vase. He nodded at the sleeping bench where he had slept as a little boy. But the old fire drum he brought out, and dragged it into the middle of the room, and said to it and to his mother, "My father would have beaten a famous roll this evening. Now I must do it." And he beat a thundering roll call on the instrument, and the drum felt so highly honored that the parchment burst with exultation. "He has a splendid touch," said the drum. "I've a remembrance of him now that will last. I expect that the same thing will happen to his mother from pure joy over her golden treasure." And this is the story of the golden treasure. End of The Golden Treasure. Recording by Jeff Machado.
Chapter 26 of Hans Christian Andersen, Fairytales and Short Stories, Volume 5, 1860 to 1865. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jessie, Irene. Hans Christian Andersen, Fairytales and Short Stories, Volume 5, 1860 to 1865, by Hans Christian Andersen. Translated by H.P. PAULL. The Storm Shakes the Shield. In the old days, when Grandpapa was quite a little boy, and ran about in little red breeches and a red coat, and a feather in his cap. For that's the costume the little boys wore in his time when they were dressed in their best. Many things were very different from what they are now. There was often a good deal of show in the streets. Show that we don't see nowadays because it has been abolished as too old-fashioned. Still, it is very interesting to hear Grandfather tell about it. It must really have been a gorgeous sight to behold in those days when the shoemaker brought over the shield when the courthouse was changed. The silken flag waved to and fro. On the shield itself a double eagle was displayed, and a big boot. The youngest lads carried the welcome and the chest of the Workmen's Guild, and their shirt sleeves were adorned with red and white ribbons. The elder ones carried drawn swords, each with a lemon stuck on its point. There was a full band of music, and the most splendid of all the instruments was the bird, as Grandfather called the big stick with the crescent on the top, and all manner of dingle-dangles hanging to it, a perfect Turkish clatter of music. The stick was lifted high in the air, and swung up and down till it jingled again, and quite dazzled one's eye when the sun shone on all its glory of gold and silver and brass. In front of the procession ran the Harlequin, dressed in clothes made of all kinds of colored patches artfully sewn together, with a black face and bells on his head like a sledge-horse. He beat people with his bat, which made a great clattering without hurting them, and the people would crowd together and fall back, only to advance again the next moment. Little boys and girls fell over their own toes into the gutter, old women dispensed digs with their elbows, and looked sour, and took snuff. One laughed, another chatted, the people thronged the windows and doorsteps, and even all of the roofs. The sun shone, and although they had a little rain too, that was good for the farmer, and when they got wetted thoroughly, they only thought what a blessing it was for the country. And what stories Grandpapa could tell! As a little boy he had seen all of these fine doings in their greatest pomp. The oldest of the policemen used to make a speech from the platform on which the shield was hung up, and the speech was in verse, as if it had been made by a poet, as indeed it had, for 3 people had concocted it together, and they had first drunk a good bowl of punch, so that the speech might turn out well. And the people gave a cheer for the speech, but they shouted much louder for the Harlequin when he appeared in front of the platform, and made a grimace at them. The fools played the fool most admirably, and drank mead out of spirit glasses, which they then flung among the crowd, by whom they were caught up. Grandfather was the possessor of one of these glasses, which had been given him by a working mason who had managed to catch it. Such a scene was really very pleasant, and the shield on the new courthouse was hung with flowers and green wreaths. "One never forgets a feast like that, however old one may grow," said Grandfather. Nor did he forget it, though he saw many other grand spectacles in his time, and could tell about them too. But it was most pleasant of all to hear him tell about the shield that was brought in the town from the old to the new courthouse. Once, when he was a little boy, Grandpapa had gone with his parents to see this festivity. He had never yet been in the metropolis of the country. There were so many people in the streets that he thought the shield was being carried. There were many shields to be seen. 100 rooms might have been filled with pictures, if they had been hung up inside and outside. At the tailor's were pictures of all kinds of clothing, to show that he could stitch up people from the coarsest to the finest. At the tobacco manufacturers were pictures of the most charming little boys, smoking cigars just as they do in reality. There were signs with painted butter and herring, clerical collars and coffins, and inscriptions and announcements into the bargain. A person could walk up and down for a whole day through the streets and tire himself out with looking at the pictures. And then he would know all about what people lived in the houses, for they had hung out their shields or signs, and, as Grandfather said, it was a very instructive thing in a great town to know at once who the inhabitants were. And this is what happened with these shields when Grandpapa came to town. He told me it himself, and he hadn't a rogue on his back, as Mother used to tell him he had when he wanted to make me believe something outrageous. For now he looked quite trustworthy. The first night after he came to the town had been signalized by the most terrible gale ever recorded in the newspapers. A gale such as none of the inhabitants had ever before experienced. The air was dark with flying tiles, old woodwork crashed and fell, and a wheelbarrow ran up the streets all alone, only to get out of the way. There was a groaning in the air, and a howling and a shrieking, and altogether it was a terrible storm. The water in the canal rose over the banks, for it did not know where to run. The storm swept over the town, carrying plenty of chimneys with it, and more than one proud weathercock on a church tower had to bow, and has never got over it from that time. There was a kind of sentry house, where dwelt the venerable old superintendent of the fire brigade, who always arrived with the last engine. The storm would not leave this little sentry house alone, but must needs tear it from its fastenings and roll it down the street, and wonderfully enough it stopped opposite to the door of the dirty journeyman plasterer, who had saved 3 lives at the last fire. But the sentry house thought nothing of that. The barber's shield, the great brazen dish, was carried away and hurled straight into the embrasure of the counsellor of justice, and the whole neighborhood said this looked almost like malice, inasmuch as they, and nearly all the friends of the counsellor's wife, used to call that lady the razor, for she was so sharp that she knew more about other people's business than they knew about it themselves. A shield with dried saltfish painted on it flew exactly in front of the door of a house where dwelt a man who wrote a newspaper. That was a very poor joke perpetrated by the gale, which seemed to have forgotten that a man who writes in a paper is not the kind of person to understand any liberty taken with him, for he is a king in his own newspaper, and likewise in his own opinion. The weathercock flew to the opposite house, where he perched, looking like a picture of malice, so the neighbors said. The cooper's tub stuck itself up under the heads of ladies' costumes. The eating-house keeper's bill of fare, which had hung at his door in a heavy frame, was posted by the storm over the entrance of the theater, where nobody went. It was a ridiculous list: horseradish, soup, and stuffed cabbage. And now people came in plenty. The fox's skin, the honorable sign of the furrier, was found fastened to the bell-pull of a young man who always went to early lecture and looked like a furled umbrella. He said he was striving after truth, and was considered by his aunt a model and an example. The inscription, Institution for Superior Education, was found near the billiard club, which place of resort was further adorned with the words, Children brought up by hand. Now this was not at all witty, but you see, the storm had done it, and no one has any control over that. It was a terrible night, and in the morning, only think! Nearly all the shields had changed places. In some places the inscriptions were so malicious that grandfather would not speak of them at all. But I saw that he was chuckling secretly, and there may have been some inaccuracy in his description, after all. The poor people in the town, and still more the strangers, were continually making mistakes in the people they wanted to see, nor was this to be avoided when they went according to the shields that were hung up. Thus, for instance, some who wanted to go to a very grave assembly of elderly men, where important affairs were to be discussed, found themselves in the noisy boys' school, where all the company were leaping over the chairs and tables. There were also people who made a mistake between the church and the theater, and that was terrible indeed. Such a storm we have never witnessed in our day, for that only happened in Grandpapa's time, when he was quite a little boy. Perhaps we shall never experience a storm of the kind, but our grandchildren may, and we can only hope and pray that all may stay at home while the storm is moving the shields. End of The Storm Shakes the Shield. Recording by Jessie, Irene. End of Hans Christian Andersen, Fairytales and Short Stories, Volume 5, 1860 to 1865, by Hans Christian Andersen. Translated by H.P. Paull.